If you feel lonely right now, this is why, and it is not because you are unlovable, not because you are forgotten, not because you are behind in life while everyone else seems to be moving forward with smiling faces and perfect relationships on the surface. It is because you are in a transition that most people do not understand. A sacred in-between season where who you used to be is slowly dissolving and who you are becoming has not fully arrived yet, and that space in the middle can feel unbearably quiet, almost like standing alone in a vast open field at dusk where the noise of the day has faded but the warmth of the night has not yet wrapped around you, and in that silence your thoughts grow louder, your memories replay stronger, your fears try to convince you that this stillness is permanent, but what you are actually experiencing is growth that is too deep to be visible on the surface. Because loneliness is often the symptom of expansion, it happens when your soul outgrows old rooms, old conversations, old versions of connection that once felt like home but now feel tight around your spirit, and instead of settling back into spaces that no longer fit, you are being gently pushed into solitude so that you can rediscover your own voice without the echo of everyone else's expectations. And it hurts because humans are wired for connection. We crave touch, understanding, shared laughter, the comfort of someone saying, "I see you," yet there are seasons when the only voice you can clearly hear is your own heartbeat, and that can feel terrifying, especially if you have always defined yourself by how needed you were, how chosen you were, how surrounded you were. But sometimes loneliness comes not to punish you, but to reveal you to yourself, to strip away distractions so you can finally confront the parts of you that were hidden beneath busyness and noise. And maybe right now you are noticing old wounds resurfacing, old insecurities whispering that you are not enough, and you wonder why these thoughts are louder when you are alone. It is because silence removes the filters. It removes the constant validation and comparison, and in that raw space you meet yourself without performance, without the mask you wear in front of others, and that meeting can feel uncomfortable before it feels empowering. Because you are learning to sit with yourself without immediately reaching for a message notification, a phone call, a distraction to fill the void, and in doing so you are strengthening an inner foundation that no external relationship can ever replace, and this is the part no one talks about, the fact that deep connection with others is almost impossible if you have never learned how to be deeply connected to yourself, because when you do not know your own needs you accept crumbs, when you do not know your own worth you tolerate inconsistency. When you do not trust your own intuition you cling to anyone who gives you temporary attention, and loneliness becomes the classroom where you relearn your standards, your boundaries, your identity beyond being someone's option, and yes, it feels heavy, yes, there are nights when the quiet is so loud it makes your chest ache. Yes, there are moments when you scroll through pictures of other people's happiness and wonder why it seems easier for them, but what you do not see are their private battles, their hidden doubts, their own silent seasons, because everyone has a chapter they do not post about. And the comparison you make is against a highlight reel, not a full story, and your story is not behind. It is unfolding at the exact pace your growth requires, and sometimes the reason you feel lonely is because you have been elevated to a level where certain energies can no longer accompany you. Conversations that once entertained you now drain you, patterns that once felt exciting now feel chaotic. And instead of regressing you are choosing alignment, even if that alignment temporarily reduces your circle. Because quality will always require more discernment than quantity, and it takes courage to stand alone rather than shrink yourself to fit into spaces that no longer honor your evolution, and perhaps you are also grieving, not just people, but versions of yourself that existed in different seasons, the hopeful version, the naive version, the version that believed certain promises would last forever. And grief often disguises itself as loneliness, because when something ends it leaves an empty space that cannot be immediately refilled, and in that emptiness you're tempted to rush, to replace, to distract. But healing does not respond to rushing, it responds to honesty, and honesty says that you are allowed to miss what was while still acknowledging why it could not continue. You are allowed to feel the ache without interpreting it as failure. You are allowed to sit in the quiet without assuming it means abandonment. Because sometimes what feels like being left is actually being protected from what would have broken you further. And there is another layer to this loneliness that is rarely acknowledged, the fact that you may have been the strong one for so long, the listener, the helper, the one who held space for everyone else, and when you are that person you often suppress your own need to be held. And eventually when you finally slow down you realize how empty you feel because you have been pouring from yourself without ever fully refilling, and that emptiness is not weakness, it is exhaustion, and the remedy is not to find someone new to pour into, but to learn how to pour into yourself with the same compassion you so freely give others, to speak to yourself gently, to validate your own emotions instead of minimizing them, to create routines that nourish your body and mind, because self-abandonment can feel like loneliness too. And when you start returning to yourself consistently you realize that you were never as alone as you thought you were. Just disconnected from your own presence, and presence is powerful, because once you feel secure within yourself, external relationships become additions rather than lifelines, and you stop chasing connection from fear and start attracting it from wholeness, and that shift changes everything. Because people respond differently to someone who is rooted, someone who does not beg for attention but radiates quiet confidence. And ironically the season where you feel the most alone is often the preparation for the most aligned connections of your life, because you are being refined, your standards clarified, your heart strengthened, your discernment sharpened, and when the right people arrive they will not feel like chaos or confusion, they will feel like peace, and peace rarely comes to those who have never learned to sit with silence. So if you feel lonely right now do not interpret it as a verdict on your worth. Interpret it as evidence of transformation, as proof that you are shedding what no longer resonates, as confirmation that you are courageous enough to face yourself without constant distraction, and remember that loneliness is a feeling, not a permanent identity. It moves like weather, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, sometimes lingering longer than expected, but always shifting, and in the meantime you can choose small acts of connection, reaching out to one person instead of waiting for many. Stepping outside into sunlight, engaging in work that reminds you of your capability. Creating something that did not exist before, because creativity is connection with life itself, and service is connection with purpose, and purpose often dissolves loneliness faster than validation ever could, and above all understand that the desire for companionship is not a flaw, it is human. But the foundation of lasting companionship is self-respect, self-awareness, and emotional maturity. And those are cultivated in solitude, not in constant noise, so this moment, as uncomfortable as it may be, is shaping you into someone who will not settle for half-hearted love, who will not compromise your values for temporary comfort, who will not silence your needs just to avoid being alone, and one day you will look back at this season and realize it was not the time you were abandoned, it was the time you were being rebuilt, strengthened in ways you could not see at the time. And the loneliness that once felt like an enemy will reveal itself as a teacher that guided you inward so you could emerge outward with clarity, depth, and a heart that is no longer desperate but ready. And until that day arrives, be patient with yourself, honor your emotions without letting them define you, and trust that this quiet chapter is not empty. It is preparing space for connections that align with the person you are becoming, not the person you used to be. And that is why you feel lonely right now, not because you are forgotten, but because you are evolving, and as this season continues, you may begin to notice that the loneliness is not just emotional but physical. It sits in your chest like a quiet weight. It follows you into rooms even when you are surrounded by people. It whispers to you at night when the world slows down and there is nothing left to distract you from your own thoughts, and you start questioning everything, wondering if you did something wrong, if you pushed people away, if you are somehow too much or not enough at the same time. And these questions can feel relentless because when connection feels distant, the mind tries to create explanations. But not every season of solitude is a consequence of failure. Sometimes it is a recalibration. Sometimes it is life removing noise so you can hear direction more clearly, because clarity rarely shouts, it speaks softly. And if your life were still crowded with constant activity, you might miss the subtle redirections happening beneath the surface. You might overlook the small shifts in your desires, the changing standards in your heart, the quiet realization that you want something deeper than what you previously accepted, and that awareness can create distance between you and environments that once felt normal, and that distance can feel like isolation, especially if the people around you are still comfortable in patterns you have outgrown. And growth can be lonely when you are the first in your circle to recognize that you want more peace, more depth, more authenticity, because choosing elevation often means releasing familiarity, and familiarity is comforting even when it is misaligned. So your loneliness may actually be the space created by your courage to no longer shrink yourself. It may be the echo left behind after you stopped laughing at conversations that compromise your values, after you stopped entertaining dynamics that drained your energy, after you stopped accepting attention that came without intention. And when you make those decisions, your world can temporarily become quieter, but quiet does not mean empty, it means selective, and selectivity is a sign of self-respect, even if it feels isolating at first. And there is also the possibility that your loneliness is highlighting unmet emotional needs that you once expected others to fulfill. Maybe you long to be understood without having to explain yourself repeatedly. Maybe you crave consistency in a world that feels unpredictable. Maybe you want reassurance that feels steady instead of temporary. And when those needs are not being met externally, the ache becomes more noticeable. But instead of viewing that ache as proof that something is wrong with you, consider that it is revealing what truly matters to you, because loneliness has a way of clarifying desire. It forces you to ask yourself what kind of love you actually want, what kind of friendships you genuinely value, what kind of presence makes you feel safe rather than anxious. And that clarity is powerful because once you know what you need, you are less likely to accept what does not align, and less likely to chase people who cannot meet you at your depth. And while you are in this in-between stage, it can feel as if life is paused, as if everyone else has found their place while you are still searching. But comparison distorts reality. It convinces you that other people's timelines are more complete. Yet you cannot measure your internal development against someone else's external milestones, because the work you are doing right now is invisible. It is happening in your thoughts, in your boundaries, in your healing, and invisible work often precedes visible transformation. Just like roots grow underground long before the tree is strong enough to stand tall, and perhaps what feels like loneliness is actually the strengthening of your roots, the deepening of your emotional resilience, so that when the right connections enter your life you are no longer approaching them from desperation but from stability, and stability changes the quality of love you attract. Because when you are no longer afraid of being alone, you stop tolerating situations that make you feel alone in someone's presence, and that is a profound shift, because there is a difference between solitude and abandonment, between chosen quiet and forced invisibility, and if you have ever felt invisible in a relationship, unheard in a friendship, overlooked in a room full of people, you know that being surrounded does not guarantee belonging, so this season might be teaching you the difference between attention and alignment, between company and compatibility, and once you understand that difference you become more patient, more intentional, more discerning, and patience can feel like loneliness when you are waiting for something meaningful, but waiting with awareness is different from waiting in desperation. And you are learning that your time and energy are valuable, that your heart deserves reciprocity, that your presence deserves appreciation, and realizations may reduce your circle temporarily, but they refine it permanently, and it is also important to recognize that loneliness can surface when you are healing old attachment patterns, when you are breaking cycles of seeking validation from unavailable people, because when you stop chasing those dynamics your nervous system may initially interpret the calm as emptiness. You might miss the intensity, the unpredictability, the emotional highs and lows that once felt like passion, and in their absence you feel a strange quiet that resembles loneliness. But what you are actually experiencing is regulation, your system adjusting to peace, and peace can feel unfamiliar if chaos was your norm, so give yourself grace as you learn to differentiate between boredom and stability, between loneliness and tranquility, because not every quiet moment is a void, some are invitations to rest, to recalibrate, to build a life that does not revolve around being chosen but around choosing yourself consistently, and when you choose yourself you begin to notice subtle shifts, you speak up more clearly, you decline invitations that do not excite you, you invest in habits that support your well-being, and these choices create a foundation that will eventually support deeper relationships, because the right people are drawn to authenticity, not performance. And authenticity is cultivated in moments when you are alone with your own truth, so if you are feeling lonely right now, do not rush to escape it, listen to it, ask it what it is trying to teach you, ask it what parts of you have been neglected, ask it where you have been settling out of fear, and allow the answers to guide your next steps. Because loneliness is not a life sentence, it is a signal, a temporary indicator that something within you is shifting, and once you respond to that signal with awareness rather than panic, the season begins to transform. And you realize that you are not stuck, you are evolving, and evolution often requires space, and space often feels like solitude before it feels like freedom. And as you continue moving through this season, there comes a deeper realization that loneliness is not only about who is absent from your life but about who you are becoming in their absence, because when certain voices grow quiet you finally hear your own more clearly, and at first that clarity can feel overwhelming, almost confrontational, because you can no longer blame distractions for the dissatisfaction you feel. You can no longer hide behind constant interaction to avoid the questions rising within you, questions about purpose, about direction, about whether you are living in alignment with what you truly desire or simply repeating patterns that feel familiar, and this confrontation with your inner world can feel isolating because not everyone around you is willing to explore those depths. Not everyone is ready to question the script they have been following, and when you begin to change internally, your external environment may not immediately reflect that change, and that gap between internal growth and external reality can feel like standing alone on a bridge between two versions of your life, one behind you that no longer fits and one ahead of you that has not yet materialized. And bridges are transitional spaces, they are not meant to be permanent residences. Yet while you are on them you can feel exposed, uncertain, even tempted to turn back simply because what you knew feels safer than what you cannot yet see, but growth rarely allows you to return comfortably to what you have outgrown, because once awareness expands, pretending becomes exhausting, and perhaps that exhaustion is part of what you are feeling now, the tiredness of small talk when you crave meaningful dialogue, the fatigue of surface-level attention when you desire depth. The weariness of explaining your worth to people who are not equipped to recognize it, and that weariness can translate into withdrawal, into choosing fewer interactions, into spending more time alone, and while that can intensify the feeling of loneliness temporarily, it is also a form of self-protection, a way of preserving your energy for connections that resonate rather than deplete. And it is important to understand that not every season is designed for expansion outward. Some seasons are designed for expansion inward. For strengthening your emotional intelligence, for healing attachment wounds that once caused you to cling too tightly or detach too quickly, for examining the beliefs you hold about love, friendship, and belonging. Because many of us were taught to equate being wanted with being worthy, to measure our value by how many people choose us, and when that external validation is reduced, we feel as though our worth has diminished. But worth is not a fluctuating currency dependent on attention. It is an intrinsic truth that exists whether others acknowledge it or not, and this season may be teaching you to anchor your identity in something deeper than popularity, deeper than constant companionship, deeper than the reassurance of always having someone available, because if your peace depends entirely on others' presence, then your stability is fragile, and life will inevitably create moments where you must stand on your own, not as punishment but as preparation. Because independence does not eliminate the need for connection, it strengthens the quality of connection you eventually allow. And perhaps another layer of your loneliness is the realization that you have been misunderstood in the past, that parts of you were simplified or overlooked, and when you reflect on those experiences you may feel a quiet sadness, a longing to be seen fully without having to dilute your personality. And that longing is not weakness, it is a reflection of your depth, because shallow connections rarely satisfy deep hearts. And if you are someone who thinks deeply, feels intensely, dreams expansively, you may find that your circle is naturally smaller, not because you are unworthy of many connections, but because you require authenticity, and authenticity is rare, and rare things take time to find, and during that waiting period it can feel like you are the only one navigating these inner landscapes, but there are others who are also in their quiet seasons, refining themselves, healing, preparing. And when paths eventually cross, the recognition will feel different, calmer, more aligned, less chaotic, because both parties have learned how to be whole on their own, and until that alignment occurs, your responsibility is not to rush the timeline but to deepen your relationship with yourself, to become the kind of presence you are hoping to attract, to offer yourself the consistency, encouragement, and honesty you wish someone else would provide, because when you learn to validate your own experiences, and honesty you wish someone else would provide, because when you learn to validate your own experiences, loneliness loses some of its intensity, it transforms from an aching void into a spacious room where creativity can flourish, where ideas can form, where clarity can settle without interruption, and in that room you may discover talents you neglected, passions you postponed, dreams you silenced for the sake of fitting in. And as you reconnect with those parts of yourself, the narrative begins to shift. You start to see that this solitude is not empty, it is fertile, it is preparing you to build relationships from a place of abundance rather than lack, and abundance in this context is not about having many people around you, it is about having a strong sense of self that does not crumble when a message goes unanswered or a plan falls through. It is about knowing that your value does not fluctuate with someone else's availability, and that confidence radiates differently. It draws in those who are secure enough to appreciate it, and gently repels those who are threatened by it, and while that filtering process may temporarily feel like further isolation, it is actually alignment and progress, because every time someone leaves who cannot meet you at your depth, space is created for someone who can, and space can feel lonely before it feels purposeful, but purpose is often born in the quiet, in the unseen preparation, in the patient endurance of seasons that test your resilience. So if you are still feeling lonely right now, understand that this is not a sign that you are destined to walk alone forever. It is a chapter that is strengthening your discernment, clarifying your desires, and solidifying your identity beyond external affirmation, and one day you will recognize that this period was not defined by absence but by awakening, not by rejection but by redirection, not by emptiness but by expansion, and the loneliness that once felt heavy will become a reminder of how far you have grown, how deeply you have learned to know yourself, and how powerfully you can stand in your own presence without shrinking, without begging, without settling, because you will have discovered that being alone is not the same as being lost, and sometimes it is the very path that leads you home to yourself.